What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph, and welcome back to Casually Competitive MTG, where it's our goal to bring you semi-competitive EDH gameplay content that is both fast-paced and entertaining. In today's video, we have something very different. We have a game revolving around commander damage and a power level that we would define as kind of more high-powered, not quite casual, but not quite competitive. Now, this is actually the second part of this episode, and in the first part, the players kind of built their decks alive with these restrictions. So if you're interested to see the thought processes that the players took in order to construct their decks, head on over to that video. There's a link on the top right of your screen as well as in the description. Now, the videos for this series are going to be more on the casual side, and they will have to follow some fairly strict restrictions. And like I said, in this episode, the restrictions were commander damage, however they wanted to interpret that, and they also had to build their decks in under 30 minutes. We thought these would be interesting deck building restrictions, so if you're interested in this deck building process, go ahead and check that out. Anyway, the commanders that the players chose for this game are the partner commanders Bruse Tarl, Boorish Herder, and Kydele, chosen of Kruphix, Yargle, Glutton of Urborg, Sliver Queen, and Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. Now, before we get into the opening hands and deck introductions, I want to go over our channel promotions. The first one we have is, if you want to help support the channel financially, we have a Patreon available where you can find additional gameplay videos, get early access to these videos, pick up some cool casually competitive memorabilia along with some other benefits, so check that out if you're interested. Also in the description is a link to our merch store where we have many clothing items available. We also have a TCG affiliate link in the description where if you purchase cards after clicking on that link, any purchase you make will help out the channel at no cost to you. And we also have a Flipside Gaming affiliate link in the description where if you use our code CasuallyMTG at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount. And from now until when the set releases, we're partnering with Flipside to give away a Zendikar Rising box. So go in the description and check out the details if you're interested in that as well. And one final thing I wanted to mention is that some people at Dragon Shield actually sent us some of their new Nomad playmats to try out and see if we like them. And if you're looking for more information, there's a link in the description, and we'll give some more of our thoughts at the end of the video. Now, with the promotions out of the way, let's get into the opening hands and deck introductions. Going first is Bill, playing the partner commanders Bruse Tarl and Kydele. The goal of this deck is to generate a lot of card advantage and value with Bruse Tarl's double strike ability, along with some valuable equipments like Infiltration Lens and Mask of Memory in order to draw a massive amount of cards and then win through just dealing a lot of damage. Kydele is in here in order to benefit extra off of that additional card draw and just generate some extra mana. Bill's opening hand contained a Scalding Tarn, an Arid Mesa, a Steam Vents, a Verdant Catacombs, a Preordain, a Mystical Tutor, and a Keen Sense. Going next is Nate L, playing Yargle, Glutton of Urborg. Now, Nate's been trying to make this deck a thing for a while, and he figured what better time to showcase it than in a pod full of commander damage-based win conditions. The focus of this deck is to play Yargle as early as possible and then either pump him up and give him double strike and extra effects to start taking players out of the game, or to use cards like Tainted Strike and Grafted Exoskeleton in order to win through Infect. Nate's opening hand contained 2 Snow-Covered Swamps, a Mana Crypt, a Charcoal Diamond, a Fleet Feather Sandals, a Chariot of Victory, and a Fear. Up next is Adam, playing Sliver Queen. Adam decided to be a little bit more creative with his interpretation of commander damage, and his main goal is to protect himself using Sliver Queen's ability to amass a board of blockers and eventually win by playing some slivers that give his commander evasion, some that pump up his commander like Magma Sliver, and then start one-shotting people very quickly. Adam's opening hand contained a Tarnished Citadel, a Bloodstained Mire, a Reflecting Pool, a Trace of Abundance, an Arcane Signet, a Feyburrow Elder, and a Jegantha the Wellspring. And finally, we have Nate playing Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. Again, Nate took a little more of a creative approach, and he decided that since he can start a combo with commander damage, it fit the qualifications. So the goal of this deck is to assemble a series of cards, including Nest of Scarabs, Blowfly Infestation, as well as a Death Trigger Outlet, and then start this combo using his commander's damage trigger. He also looks to use these -1/-1 counters to kind of control the board and keep his opponents from dealing damage to him and protecting himself with Death Touch Snakes. Nate's opening hand contained a Forest, a Swamp, a Lotus Petal, a Carnival of Souls, an Earthcraft, an Attrition, and a Manglehorn. If you're interested in watching the games we play live, we stream frequently over to our Twitch channel, link is in the description. And like I mentioned before, if you want to watch the construction of these decks, we have a video that we posted just a few days ago with this kind of all laid out for you, so you can really get inside the minds of your favorite casually competitive members. That being said, after we recorded that video, our players sleeved up their decks, played some practice hands to get a feel for what these newer or different style of decks could really do, and then got ready for this commander damage-based game. Bill starts off this game by drawing, playing a Scalding Tarn as his land, and then paying 1 life to sacrifice it to search up a Breeding Pool to the battlefield, paying 2 life to have it enter untapped. He then for a blue mana casts a Preordain, scrying 2 cards to the bottom, drawing a card, and then passing the turn to Nate L. Nate, on his turn, plays a Snow-Covered Swamp, and then for 0 mana, casts a Mana Crypt. He then taps this Mana Crypt to cast a tapped Charcoal Diamond, and with nothing left, ships the turn to Adam. Adam on his turn plays a Bloodstained Mire and then passes the turn to Nate. Nate plays a Cavern of Souls as his land, and when it enters the battlefield, he names Human. He then plays a Lotus Petal for 0 mana and then uses his mana sources to cast his commander, Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, plays a Flooded Strand, and then passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps and in his upkeep wins his Mana Crypt trigger, not taking any damage. He then plays a Snow-Covered Swamp and then taps his mana to cast his commander, Yargle, Glutton of Urborg. He then goes to pass the turn to Adam, and on Nate's end step, Adam pays 1 life to crack his Bloodstained Mire to find a tapped Stomping Grounds to the battlefield. Adam then goes to his turn, untaps, plays a Reflecting Pool as his land, and then for 2 mana casts a Trace of Abundance targeting his Stomping Grounds. With nothing left, he ships the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, plays a Forest, and then goes to combat. However, in response to moving to combat, Bill pays 1 life to crack his Flooded Strand to search up an untapped Hollowed Fountain, losing 2 more life. He then for 2 mana casts Snap, targeting Hapatra. Snap resolves, Hapatra gets bounced, Bill untaps 2 lands, and then in his second main phase, Nate recasts his commander from his hand. He then goes to pass the turn to Bill, and on Nate's end step, Bill for a blue mana casts a Mystical Tutor. In response to the Mystical Tutor, Adam pays 2 life to cast a Mental Misstep, stopping the tutor. Bill then goes to his turn, untaps, plays an Arid Mesa as his land, and with nothing left, gives the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep wins his Mana Crypt trigger, again not taking damage. He then casts a Sword of Truth and Justice, and he then goes to equip this sword to his commander, and in response to this equip activation, Bill for a white mana casts a Path to Exile, targeting Yargle. Yargle is exiled, Nate decides to put him into his command zone, and Nate gets another Snow-Covered Swamp to the battlefield, tapped. With nothing left, Nate passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, plays a Tarnished Citadel as his land, and then for 2 mana casts an Arcane Signet, not taking any damage from the Citadel. He then for 3 mana casts a Feyburrow Elder, and with nothing left, ships the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, plays a Swamp as his land, and then goes to combat and swings Hapatra at Nate. Nate declares no blockers, takes 2 damage, and when Hapatra deals combat damage, Nate puts a -1/-1 counter on Adam's Feyburrow Elder and creates a 1/1 Death-Touching Snake. He then in his second main phase casts a Mana Crypt, and he then uses this Mana Crypt to help cast a Manglehorn. Manglehorn resolves, and when it enters the battlefield, Nate targets Nate L's Sword of Truth and Justice to destroy it. He then goes to pass the turn to Bill, and on Nate's end step, Bill pays 1 life to crack his Arid Mesa to search up a tapped Stomping Grounds to the battlefield. Bill then goes to his turn, untaps, plays a Reflecting Pool as his land, and then taps his mana to cast one of his partner commanders, Kydele, Chosen of Kruphix. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, and then loses his Mana Crypt trigger in his upkeep. He then for 0 mana casts a Crow Mox. When it enters the battlefield, he imprints Fear, and then for 3 mana, he casts a Grim Tutor. He searches a card to his hand, loses 3 life, and then for 1 mana, casts a tapped Mana Vault due to the Manglehorn. He then casts another tapped artifact, Fleetfeather Sandals, and with nothing left, he ships the turn to Adam. Adam untaps and then retaps for 1 of each color to cast his commander, Sliver Queen. He then taps Feyburrow Elder for 1 of each colored mana in order to cast Bring to Light. Since he used 5 colored mana for Bring to Light, he's able to search up a first Sliver to the battlefield, and when it's cast from Bring to Light, he cascades into a Mana Echoes. Now, for those of you who are unaware, this goes very infinite with the Sliver Queen. However, since Adam has no mana to dump into Sliver Queen, he has to pass the turn to Nate. Nate untaps and in his upkeep loses his Mana Crypt trigger, taking 3 damage. He then goes to combat and swings 4 total damage at Nate L. Nate L declares no blockers, takes the damage, and when Hapatra deals combat damage to a player, Nate puts a -1/-1 counter on Feyburrow Elder and then creates another 1/1 snake. He then, in his second main phase, casts an Assassin's Trophy, targeting Mana Echoes. Mana Echoes is destroyed, however, Adam, knowing his deck list, decides to not search off of Assassin's Trophy since he has no basic lands. Nate then, still in his second main phase, casts an uncounterable Zulaport Cutthroat, and with nothing left, ships the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, and as his land for turn, plays a Steam Vent, paying 2 life to have it enter untapped, and he then taps for 4 mana to cast his other partner commander, Bruse Tarl, Boorish Herder. When Bruse Tarl enters the battlefield, he gives Kydele Double Strike and Lifelink, and he then taps his mana to cast a Keen Sense, enchanting Kydele. He then goes to combat and swings Kydele at Nate L. Nate L declares no blockers, and from each of the instances of damage, the first strike and the normal damage, Bill draws 1 card, and Nate takes a total of 4 commander damage. Bill then, with nothing left, passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep, loses his Mana Crypt trigger and also decides to untap his Mana Vault. He then plays an Ancient Tomb as his land for turn, and he then taps his mana to recast his commander, Yargle, from the command zone for the second time this game. He then passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps and starts his turn off by casting a Magma Sliver. On cast, the first sliver triggers and he cascades into an Enlightened Tutor. He casts the Enlightened Tutor and searches up an Intruder Alarm to the top of his library. He then taps his mana to cast Jegantha the Wellspring and plays a Blood Crypt as his land for turn, paying 2 life to have it enter untapped. He then goes to combat and swings both of his legendary slivers at Bill, and Bill declares no blockers and takes 14 total damage. Adam then ships the turn to Nate. Nate untaps and in his upkeep wins his Mana Crypt trigger, not taking any damage. He then goes to combat and swings Hapatra at Nate L. Nate bargains with Nate L, claiming that he needs to continue putting these -1/-1 counters on Adam's creatures to keep his board and mana under control. Nate L agrees, takes the 2 damage, and when Hapatra deals damage, Nate puts another -1/-1 counter on Fabro Elder and creates another snake. In his second main phase, Nate, for 1 mana, casts a Soul Ring, and he then for 2 mana, casts an Earthcraft. He then uses this Earthcraft to help untap some of his lands and generate enough mana to cast Attrition. In response to Attrition, Adam, knowing that his mana generator could die at any time, decides to, for 2 mana, cast a Dramatic Reversal, untapping it to at least get a little more mana out of his creature. Dramatic Reversal resolves, Attrition resolves, and Nate then ships the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, plays a Verdant Catacombs as his land for turn, and then taps his mana to cast a Sword of Fire and Ice. He then equips this sword to Bruse and then goes to combat and swings Bruse Tarl and Kydele both at Nate L. On attack, he gives Kydele Double Strike and Lifelink, and Nate decides he wants to keep his commander around and decides to not block. Nate takes 9 total damage in this exchange, however there's a few triggers. First, on first strike damage, Keen Sense triggers and Bill draws off of Kydele. Then on the normal damage, when Bruse Tarl deals combat damage, the Sword of Fire and Ice targets Fabro Elder in order to deal 2 damage to it. In response, Adam taps Fabro for 1 of each color, and then Fabro Elder dies, and Bill draws a card off of the sword and then draws a card off of the normal Kydele damage. Bill then gains 4 life from the lifelink, and before moving phases, Adam taps for a total of 6 mana to activate his commander 3 times to make 3 1/1 slivers. Bill then goes to his second main phase and cracks his Verdant Catacombs to shock in a Temple Garden, losing a total of 3 life in this exchange, and then for a green mana, he casts an Absinthe Pilgrim. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps and in his upkeep wins his Mana Crypt trigger and again decides to untap Mana Vault. He then plays a Snow-Covered Swamp as his land for turn and then taps his mana to cast Chariot of Victory. He then equips this Chariot to his commander, and then really having no good targets to swing at and feeling like he's been put in an awkward situation, he just passes the turn to Adam. On Nate L's end step, Nate uses Earthcraft to generate a black mana from a swamp, and he then sacrifices this tapped snake to activate Attrition to kill Magma Sliver. Zulaport Cutthroat triggers off of the snake dying, dealing 1 damage to each of Nate's opponents, and Nate gains 1 life. The Magma Sliver then dies, and Adam then goes to his turn, untaps, and starts his turn off by, for 3 mana, casting an Intruder Alarm. He then goes to combat and swings everything he has at Bill. Bill decides to only block the Sliver Queen, and after all is said and done, Bill loses his blocker along with 15 life. With nothing left, Adam ships the turn to Nate. Nate untaps everything except for his creatures due to Intruder Alarm, and in his upkeep wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He then plays a Forest as his land, and then taps his mana to cast a Carnival of Souls. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps also everything except for his creatures, draws his card for turn, and for a blue mana casts a Gitaxian Probe. He decides to look at Nate L's hand, and he then draws his card and follows this up by, for 2 mana, casting a Bloom Tender. And when it enters the battlefield, not only do all creatures untap, but Nate loses 1 life and generates a black mana from the Carnival of Souls. Bill then plays a Mana Confluence as his land, and then goes to combat and swings Bruse Tarl and Kydele at Nate L. On attack, he gives Kydele Double Strike and Lifelink, and before blockers are declared, Nate uses Earthcraft to help generate a black mana in order to sacrifice a creature and use Attrition to kill Kydele. When his creature dies, the table loses 1 life, and Nate gains 1 life from the Zulaport Cutthroat, and in response to the initial activation, Bill for a green mana casts a Veil of Summer. Nate then decides to again use Earthcraft to generate another black mana, and sacrifices another snake to again retarget Kydele with Attrition. The Zulaport Cutthroat triggers again, and this Attrition trigger resolves. Veil of Summer then resolves. Bill doesn't draw a card since there were no blue or black spells cast, and then the initial Attrition target fizzles because there's no more target. Nate L then declares his commander Yargle as a blocker for Bruse, since it now has first strike, and Bruse then dies. With nothing left, Bill passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep, he thankfully wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He then casts a Grafted Exoskeleton. He then equips this Grafted Exoskeleton to his commander, and also equips his Fleet Feather Sandals, now having a very scary Infect creature. He then goes to combat and swings at Adam with this scary Infect creature. Adam declares no blockers, takes 11 Infect, and Adam then loses the game. Nate L then passes the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep loses his Mana Crypt trigger, taking 3 damage. He then taps for 6 mana to cast a Finale of Devastation, X equaling 4. In response to this finale, really wanting some of that ramp, Bill for 2 blue mana casts a Mana Drain. Mana Drain resolves, Finale is countered, and Nate then goes to combat and swings a total of 4 damage at Nate L. Nate L takes the damage, and upon doing combat damage to a player, Hapatra puts a -1/-1 counter on Bill's Bloom Tender. Nate also generates another snake creature token, and when it enters the battlefield, he loses 1 life and generates a black mana. With nothing left to do, however, he ships the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, and at the beginning of his first main phase, he gets 6 floating mana from his Mana Drain. He uses 4 of this to help recast his commander Bruse Tarl, and he then uses the rest of this floating mana to help recast his other commander, Kydele. Unfortunately for Bill, Nate has too many control pieces on the board, and before Bill moves phases, Nate uses 1 black mana and sacrifices a snake in order to kill Bruse with Attrition. Upon the sacrifice, Zulaport Cutthroat triggers, dealing 1 damage to each of Nate's opponents, which includes dealing enough damage to Nate L to take him out of the game. Still before moving phases, Nate uses his other floating black mana from the Carnival of Souls trigger earlier to sacrifice another snake to Attrition in order to kill Bill's other creature, Kydele. Nate then goes to his turn, untaps, and in his upkeep loses his Mana Crypt trigger, taking 3 damage, and he then goes to combat and swings the final 3 damage at Bill. Bill has nothing to block with, takes the damage, and Nate then wins the game. Now, before we get into a post-game recap, I did just want to make a quick note on the Nomad playmats that were used in this video. Now, Dragon Shield did send us these playmats to use, however, we weren't paid to do an ad read or anything for this product. They just asked if we'd like a few and if we could showcase them in a video, so we agreed, and after receiving them and playing around with them a little bit, we realized that although we don't really move around much when we're playing games, we don't move locations or anything, these are going to come in handy, very much so, when COVID dies down and conventions finally take place again. We're planning on going to a few conventions, and these will come in really handy and allow us to play games in an airport and then get on the plane and pick up the game later on. So we're really excited to try these out, and if you're interested, there's a link in the description with more information about these. That being said, to wrap this game up, I did want to talk a little bit about the game. Although the theme was commander damage and no one necessarily died to commander damage, I do think commanders dealing damage in this game was so incredibly impactful. From something a little more minor, like the repeated Hapatra triggers and the Bruse Tarl damage, taking out Adam's Fabro Elder, down to taking someone completely out of the game with a really beefed up and infected commander. Commander damage really did play a large part in this game, and we hope you enjoyed that aspect of it. If you do like these kind of lower powered games and want to see more of the discussion style video that we did previously where we built these decks, let us know in the comments. We're interested in doing more and would like to know what you guys have to say. That all being said, that is all we have for this video. We hope you enjoyed it. I am Joseph, this is Casually Competitive MTG, and we will see you next time.